tell a CEO about his business that I'm going to know better than him. All I can do is like ask him or like questions of why they chose what they did. But ultimately, most of the conversations end up being like therapy for what it is to be a founder and like to like not have an outlet someone to speak to, because like you can't tell your board certain things, you can't tell your during port certain things, right? Because you don't want them running in, like every thought you have you can't tell them, because then they go run and do it and you're like, no, I just wanted to talk. So like I think the founder role is so lonely so often, founder slash CEO role, because like they don't have even a peer network. It's their peers are busy in the same situation. Right. So anyway, like I end up being like a therapist. It's not in a bad way, but like I almost am like the personal board to the CEO to be able to say what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and like digesting it. You know?
Is that because you have been through it? I mean,
yeah, it's only because I've been through it. And like again, it's like, and then actually post exit to some degree, like having that feeling of being lost, right? So actually, like I use that to actually then go talk to the founder of like, don't forget why you're building what you're building, and like what would be like what's success for you. Because sometimes you get lost just like going and going and being better and better and better, but like to what end? Right? For you as a person. And so anyway, like that's actually where most of our conversations end up. You know, they think it's all going to be strategy, but it's actually like, why am I doing what I'm doing and where do we want it to go? And then like, the self-reflection piece, like I didn't do hardly any of that when I was building. I don't know about you guys, felt like when you were just in the wheel.
So there's a lot to unpack, because I think ultimately, I think most people are not going to be in a situation where they have time to think about the personal self. Well, this also is in the 20s, right? You're meant to just throw yourself at one thing and go deep to kind of reap the value, accrue the value. And it's at the sacrifice of being a whole person. Right. It's like you said, kind of mix your personality to being a startup founder, which is, and then I kind of been through the same thing afterwards, where it's like, well, at least you have an exit. I didn't have a significant exit, but I've had a period of quiet reflection.
Who the hell am I? I don't take a like.
Exactly. And what I realized what I gained was so valuable, which helps you ground you even more. So if you want to build more ventures in the future, is the personal aspect, which are those things you talk about.
No, that's great. I like that, because like I always tell people like, when are you going to build the next one? When are you going to do it? And I'm like, I mean, now I know like what is important to me if I go build a company, like really what my values were. Because like the first or second time through it, you're kind of just trying to figure it out. But like now I'm like, I don't want a company with more than 20 people. You don't want more than 20. Because like I'm a builder, like I don't like managing. I don't like the governance of things that are required to build like certain types of companies. But I only know that by going through it to the extreme.
So you like a certain size where like everyone and people can like come together and figure things out and
yeah, I like the intellectual like debate and respect, and like or anybody can contribute equally. And I was always like a reluctant leader, in the sense it's like
you're by force.
But by force, right? But like I'm never one where it's like I need to be the captain.
Correct.
And it's like I ended up being the captain for lots of reasons, but I don't take any, like, I don't know.
It's not ego driven.
Yes, exactly. Because it's like it's not that fun for me. Like what's fun for me is like sitting, like if you guys are like, hey, I got a great idea. I'd be like, what can you do? What can you do? What can I do? And like and whoever it is, like that is for me what's a lot of fun. And then like at some point, like I recognize like once Lalamove got so big, it's like I don't want to, like somebody's so much better suited to run teams of hundreds and thousands than me. And like at first I was like, oh, like I'm a failure. I can't I can't upskill to that. And then I was like, wait a minute. Afterwards I reflected, I was like, hey, I don't enjoy that, and that's okay. Like where's my sweet spot? And that is someone else's sweet spot. And like I'm not anything less, because I don't want to be that. So anyway, that's where like I say 20 people. It could be 50, it could be 100, but like the point is
I think on average, if you're a good founder, that you're going to be in that kind of position. I've known a lot of people who've like kind of raised to unicorn venture status, have hundreds of people, and they say the same exact thing. Right. I think it's a different type of breed of person. Maybe like the barbarian sociopath. Likes to. I manage thousands of people. This is my. It's like a corporate ego, right? But like if you're like a innate builder, or you want to solve problems or add value, to have impact around you, it's like it's not really about that.
It's very different things that you enjoy.
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah. And what I would say is like working with Shing, who started Lalamove. There's so few people that can upskill themselves as quickly as a company that like
Yeah, to match that
right?
speed.
Like if you think about that, like we grew more than 300% for the first like 6 years of the company.
Yeah.
Think about any personal skill that you have.
Yeah.
If you ask yourself to be 3x better
Yeah,
next year
yeah,
than you were this year and do that like several years in a row,
Yeah.
the vast majority of us like cannot.
Average.
And if you do, like you end up having to trade off everything
Yes, correct.
except that.
Yeah.
So anyway, at least that's my experience, like what I saw.
And it's not just that is like some sort of exponential growth along like a single line, right? You basically need to teach some of the old skills you have, and you have to build some new skills because the organizational complexity, the work you have been doing will become different as the company scales. First, it's not just like the size thing, right?
For sure, yeah. Like, and it's the recognition of that and the letting go of like what you were good at. So I always used to say like in my job, because like again, I started when we were like 10 people and I left when we were about 10,000, you know?
Yeah.
And I said like I would always be I was like I felt like a sociopath because I was like terrible at my job for 6 months. So I'm like, you're figuring it out.
That's normal. Right?
No, but then like after 6 months, you're like, I got this. And I'm like, for 6 months, for 6 months, you're great. And then the company goes 3x, and like
You're like, then you're not.
shit, I'm terrible again.
Yeah.
So it's like this mental gymnastic of like feeling great and then like terrible in a very short amount of time, and like that actually can be quite exhausting.
Yeah.
So again, like that's my experience. I don't know what your experience like. You've gone across a lot of different companies too, especially with Rocket and like jumping in at different points. Like what have you guys seen about this?
You went first.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, yeah, because what you say is very interesting because at the end of the day, because you went through it, I feel a lot of people in like our position, if we haven't gone through that, we still have that what if hunger or desire or like because I feel like after my quiet few years of reflection the past few years, I think I've come to the same conclusion, but without the experience. So it's just like one part of me is like I should just go be a founder or something, but it's like more curated to something that's like more ikigai, like it's just more suited to me. It doesn't have to be tech.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be so ego driven.
Yeah.
It has to align more with who I am as a person.
Yeah.
And then I think I've matured to a point where I can probably do that.
Yeah.
But it's more like if I had that experience before, I probably also don't need that desire. Right. So
yeah, well, and I think like you have to go through it, right? Like it's like life. You have to go through it to know what's important.
Yeah.
And so there's like no just like knowing. Actually, there's a few people that are so vocationally driven that they can just like.
correct.
And I was always jealous of those people, but I just had to throw myself in to figure it out. Like the doing was the part that forced me through self-reflection, but I never did it till not enough until after.
I kind of like the journey, like of the past 11 years. Last week we just had the sort of MBA reunion. I think you guys joined Rocket around the same time. Young at that time, sort of. I mean, you have friends going to like hedge funds, friends going to consulting, friends going to large corporates. Last week I was in a reunion of my MBA class. I mean, in Xi'an, a city in northwest China. I think 10 of us showed up. People went through very different career paths. And it was interesting that I probably the most reconciled with myself amongst the cohort because
what do you mean?
Yeah.
Because I mean we have a partner from McKinsey, we have somebody who is very senior at the investment bank in China, we have somebody else who is a VP of a large brand, etc., etc. But I think I'm in a situation where I have probably because I've been through so much turbulence in Rocket and after Rocket. I looked at people who complain about things which they have no control of. So I look at things. I mean, at least I have control of what I want to do. I mean, it gives me anxiety because sometimes you need to figure out what's the right thing to do. Sometimes you feel really shitty because you made a wrong decision. You led people towards the wrong path. But at the end of the day, we look back at all this, and the richness of experience is something that I was like, wow, okay, interesting. And after the whole thing, I am probably the only one amongst the group who doesn't have any white hair.
Hey, once I stopped working, my hair started to grow back.
I can take a guess and interpret maybe why.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of these people are, it's kind of what we tied to what we talked about before. We're optimizing, we're putting ourselves into the situation of optimizing towards a non-clear goal without non-clear optimum, other than hyper capitalistic growth, right? So in that you don't have a defined sense of self, which is really important to probably kind of have along that way if you can carve the time. But if not, you do it later afterwards, like what we're talking about, right? So all your friends in that situation, they're living to society's expectations of what you should be, a partner, MD or whatever.
Especially in context,
right?
yeah.
And I think what's very interesting in your case if you really look at the evolution of momentum works over time, it's a manifestation of who you are and look at the products and how you execute them, right? Like the type of media or the content you do. It's always been very consistently Jianggan. Like I just know it, and that really works well for you. Like, so I think about like, I've been thinking about this for the past few years. Like, if we look at our past experience in the past decade, how can we use our skill set to monetize them in a very different market environment? Right? Because I can't, I mean, up until recently, I didn't have too many opportunities where rocket ships were coming across me. Maybe in the past few years, things are changing, maybe situations changing, but in general, it's been very hard to get a job or to build something with easy money, fast scaling, right? It doesn't exist. So, but like what you've done is, I think you've kind of put yourself, you injected yourself, sense of self in the company. The company is you, right? And so that's why you
That
probably
doesn't sound very promising, but
No, but
but
like,
there's pros and cons to it. There's pros
of
and
course,
cons,
of course,
right? So like you go very wide in the beginning, which is a valid strategy for startups, because then you see which points are valuable. Then you hone in, which I think you've done when it works. And sometimes you open up more opportunity again, more chaos to find out how to grow that more. You kind of go in focus again, right? And I think that's why you have more balance because you've kind of been living the way you want to live and you've been able to monetize it, whether it's been in cockroach mode or growth mode. You've kind of been through that, right?
enjoy the process of working with colleagues at the moment. And I think just now I mentioned about the fact that I'm most reconciled with myself.
well,
Um,
and I think I had the same experience too.
mm,
Like talking to my other friends that went through the MBA, we had a reunion last year, and
mm,
the people that go through some like the gift of entrepreneurship or being a founder or whatever is maybe not like in the moment. It's like incredibly hard and taxing,
Yeah.
and like you're doing things like to like the nth degree all the time just to survive, right? And
Yeah.
it's a lot, but the gift it gives you is that you get to know yourself and you do it for the reasons that you know are important. Whereas like somebody who's gone through the corporate route,
Yeah.
it's they're still working within the constructs of an environment that's already been shaped for them, and they have to conform, not in a bad way, but they have to fit that system. Whereas an entrepreneur, you are building this, like you're building the cars, you drive it. And through that, you end up learning what is truly yours. So when you
Yeah.
say like Momentum Works is a reflection of him,
Yeah.
it's because he's gone through that journey to actually know what him is
Right.
because in entrepreneurship, there is no context, there is no system
Yeah.
unless you create it.
Yeah. Well, I think there's two parts to that. One I think early days it's going to be more a subconscious manifestation,
Yes.
right? And then over time, as you like, I mean, I don't know, you have to ask your team this, Jianggan, but as you mature, you can more consciously think about that from a personal and professional standpoint, how you want to take that towards a vision, right? So whereas I think in corporate, there's a little bit of the corporate trap. What you described is that people might conform themselves to corporate, but that's wrong. Because at the end of the day, a lot of things are out of their hands. The way corporate machine is built, the game is different.
mm.
So when you do that, you become very unhappy. And those people are mixing up like personal expression or personal interest or personal brand with a corporate and they're trying to become that, but it's not. So like I think the people who really play corporate well, and if you're not going to the very, very top as CEO, but you're somewhere in between, that's very high level, it's more like I have my life here and my life in corporate is separate. Right. So
Yes.
I do 9 to 5, but then I go have tons of money. I go ski in the Alps or whatever every year,
Yeah,
then
they don't lie to themselves to the
correct.
game that it is, and they make that
Yeah.
game work
Yeah.
for them.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
and I think the flip side of entrepreneurship is that you can't divorce that early on. It's impossible. Otherwise, you will not truly knowledge.
You
You cannot
can't build
you
anything.
can't build belief. You cannot
Yeah.
get people to a mission. So then that's where the flip side for an entrepreneur is that it's very dangerous that after say 10 years of execution, it's your own baby, and then you exit, and what do you think? What do you do? Right?
Yeah.
It's just like, you know, yeah.
So one thing I would like to ask you guys, I mean, obviously you left Rocket to join Lalamove. It's very early days. I think we left at the same time
Yeah.
because of
Oh,
separate. Yeah.
forced. Yeah, we lost stuff.
We lost the battle, and I think I've of course lots of reflections. I think the one thing for sure is that we're focusing on the wrong things.
Well, that's
We focus a lot on BI. We focus a lot on operations. Yeah.
But the thing is, the way on venture scaling that structure of Rocket Internet, it's out of our hands, right? We were at the country execution level, whereas at the strategic level, it's failed. And that layer was very multi-layered. We were technically N-2 from Oliver somewhere, but at the same time, one was in Brazil, one was in Germany. It's not like we're going to pick up the phone and call Ollie to change strategy, right? I mean, by right, Rocket was structured where you could, but it takes a lot of balls. You're going to cut out, like, you're going to kill a lot of social capital.
And also, you should be willing to sacrifice your like real-time KPIs transmitted to Germany over a certain period of time because you are doing the right thing. You're focusing resources on something long term, and that is hard. That is mentally very hard.
What do you guys think? Do you think from an execution standpoint, we were probably one of the better regions out of Easy Taxi executing KPIs? I mean, like what was given to us and what we had to achieve.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of the numbers back.
Quite a while ago.
The model of Rocket for Easy Tax, I can't speak for the other ventures because
Yeah.
you guys participated, but at least for me, it's like bound to be a failed model unless you rise to number one very, very quickly, and then you get the subsequent funding to continue that, like that blitzkrieg, right?
Mm.
Because there really was no strategy. Like the strategy was open markets as quick as you can,
Yeah.
onboard supply, get as
Yeah.
many rides as you can. But that's like a very empty strategy.
Yeah.
Like from a resource standpoint, the tech, it's like Southeast Asia is all different markets, right? Just like South America, just like
Yes.
everywhere. And so it's like
All different.
having run subsequent like technology companies that are heavy in operations,
Hmm.
if your product doesn't have some level of like nuance,
Yeah.
even just payments, for example, something like this,
Yeah. Yeah.
like something very simple, like it doesn't scale. Like you can keep throwing people and money and marketing to like drive inbound, but there's like no retention. So it's like we were bound to fail. And then once Grab raised 250 million for 4 countries and we'd only raised 70 million for 33 countries, like if it's a money game and a speed game,
Yeah. Correct.
money speeds you up.
Yeah.
And then if everything else being held equal, let's say product and tech with Grab and Easy Taxi were the same, you're toast
Yeah.
in that kind of market because consumers have no switching costs,
Correct.
right? They have a coupon switching cost.
Yeah. Correct.
I remember like a few months into Rocket, into Easy Taxi, I wrote an email to someone higher up in Rocket. I said, okay, what's the strategy?
So many times.
Guess what I got? I got an email back in all caps, about 600 to 700 words, saying that what the hell is strategy? It's all execution. It's about, as you said, opening new markets, or owning market share, etc. Nothing wrong with that. But the thing is that, I mean, how do you get there, right? I mean, especially as you said, right? I mean, 70 million for 32 countries, but it's one product team for 32 countries.
Yeah.
The amount of customization that's needed, the amount of like local nuances that you have to deal with, and especially in Southeast Asia, the amount of languages you have to deal with.
Yeah.
Hell.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then it's like simple things like even how to scale your team. We had zero playbook, right? Like you could have structured your team different than I structured my team, which you structured different from your team. And so it's like
That was a neat fun about it.
what? No, it was fun, but like from it, like if your game plan,
Yeah.
speed, and execution,
Mm.
like these are not decisions that an MD should really have to think through,
Correct.
right? Like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like you have if you have 1,000 rides a day, you should have 3 ops people, like
Correct. Correct.
and whether that's right or wrong for the country, the speed in which you can do it because you don't have to think about how to do it
Yeah.
is way more important if that is your strategy.
Correct.
So like that's where the strategy stopped way too quickly. If you ask me, there's no playbook.
I think I remember you started Hong Kong before Vietnam, and then I was asking
I
you.
started Hong Kong, then like
I remember.
after a month of getting into Hong Kong, they're like, "Go help him start Singapore."
And then like asking you.
I was,
Yeah.
I mean, talk about home later, but I started in Singapore. I have the money in my personal account. I have Citibank asked me, hey, why do you have so much money? And then they said, okay, there's this guy called Blake in Hong Kong. Obviously, he's not from Hong Kong, and he has experience. He can come and help you.
1 month of experience.
Experience.
They were all talking to you, I think. You were the shining star. Like, okay, this is how we do it.
Then he descended to Singapore, staying at a shitty hotel, and I was saying, how do you do it? Let's print some.
We print flyers, and we spent like 3 hours under Marina Bay Sands in the taxi line.
Yeah.
That's what we do. I go, I think so. Someone trained me. Literally, I
Yeah.
stopped in Hong Kong,
Correct.
and was Dennis there? I don't know. Stick around. I think Dennis for one day. Was here are your KPIs. Here's your budget. See ya. And I was like,
Yeah.
and our office literally for
Yeah.
5 people was not 50 square feet.
Yeah.
At least we have the office to talk about.
Right? So anyway, like, and I don't blame any of them, right? Like of course but it forced you to learn, and like obviously it's what probably made us friends,
Yeah.
right? Had there been a playbook and you just stayed in your own thing, it's like, so like I have no regrets or whatever, but like getting to do something similar to the second time around, where I still made lots and lots of mistakes,
Yeah.
but I was like at least aware of some of like there has to be like a thoughtfulness as a
Right.
leader at least 3 to 6 months out.
Yeah.
And it could change if the information changes. Just to be like, let's open. And like right after I saw you, I went and like helped hire Usman and went to Jakarta.
Yeah.
And then I got sent to Bombay. And I was still a guy who only had like 3 weeks on the job, right? Like,
So he's a lot more experienced. He's going to help actually, even though that the place that he has done is like 1 month old, right?
1 month old, and actually Hong Kong was a terrible performer. Singapore like was the shining star. Actually, if you remember,
Yeah.
right? You know, like relative. I remember the chart where it showed like weeks to number of rides, and like
Because there's a lot to do with the supply and demand dynamics in
They're all kind of
inherently.
Agreed. Like, but at the time, it's like we didn't necessarily know that.
Yeah,
We didn't know that,
yeah.
right? Like, you're like bigger city, bigger should have more orders, like less competition, blah blah blah. Like, maybe if there's not enough smartphones, I remember hearing the stories about like you probably like
Yeah.
selling smartphones or buying them, right? And it's like, is that
unsecured loans.
is that right? Exactly. Is that like when you're spending so much time trying to equip your drivers to be able to be on your platform, you're not building your platform, you're selling phones.
Correct. And at one point it was like
Biggest.
revenue-wise, yeah, it's like the biggest. So
Yeah. Anyway, like, but great stories, like war stories after the fact. But when you're in the moment, you're like, that's the blind leading the blind. So sorry, guys.
it was the same for Zalora when we launched Zalora very
Yeah.
early days.
Yeah.
It was just ex Groupon guys. No one knew what they were doing. But then you're just sent to one country who has 1 month more experience.
Yeah.
It's like they just draw the chart. Okay, here's operations, here's buying, here's marketing. You just need to build each of these things. And then you just pick one. And then it's just like, okay, good luck.
Yeah,
Then I'll to the next country and do the same thing, right? So it's just very, very
I remember spent so much time also, like you said you had money in the bank account. Like they're like, you need to go get on this bank account for it. Because maybe it's a Laura Hong. No, it's something else that got shut down.
It was like a share, it was like a
shell entity here, but my name wasn't on it. I was also not local, and I like, and they're like, but the money's going there. But oh, by the way, they've got like $100,000 of debt, and we're only transferring you $50,000. And I was like, I got creditors coming after me who I don't even know who they are. So, like it's from like past entities
Because you are director of that.
because I'm the director. My name's on the director, and like I can't get off of. It was like I don't know what to do. So
I remember that entity in Malaysia, which we
3D services.
I was handling all the liquidation of all the entities in Southeast Asia.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's one entity in Malaysia called Rocket Internet Services Sendirian in the Heart,
Okay.
and that has gone through like 8 different companies, the same entity, and has never done audit,
Yeah.
and have 4 directors who were working for different companies,
Yeah.
and obviously everyone wants to resign, but nobody wants to sign to let it.
Yeah. So we sign it off.
So did you get them all in the same room? Like how? What?
I just didn't care. I mean,
It just went away.
left it there.
Yeah.
Didn't care. I was not.
We're not it. Okay, yeah.
I'm one of them, but I think Tito Costa was one of them, and so I'm not sure how it went.
But this is like the crazy stuff, right? Like, and then like maybe we can like talk about the good stuff about Rocket, like as like an influence.
Well, yeah,
Absolutely. Right, like the impact there, and like I think the mindset. So like that mindset of just operational and execution, like overdrive,
Yeah.
which you do need to be an entrepreneur. It should be focused, but like to survive.
Yeah.
I think they bred a lot of that mindset in Southeast Asia. Like I always say they like accelerated tech development in this region by some number of years. I don't know.
By a big quantum.
By a lot, right? Not just because those people also went on to start companies and run companies, but just like the mentality of like, how do you tackle such fragmented markets and like build something substantial and meaningful and get like a lot of youth and energy behind it? I think they like not the only ones, I'm sure, but like an impetus for the region in a very healthy way.
Once in a while, some journalist from somewhere would come and ask me, saying that, "Hey, there's a bubble forming in this sector. Too much money is going into getting into this sector. They're giving too much subsidies, etc., etc." Is that bad for the region? I always say that it's good because a couple of things. I mean, any investment that gets into this sort of helps with the infrastructure. I mean, somebody else is going to create supporting infrastructure for this company to work, and it's going to help with talent because people are getting a sense of, I mean, how accelerated, I mean, operations, etc. are like.
Yeah.
And they also create a bunch of people. I think like lots of our alumni, like who are not satisfied with the status quo. So many people left Rocket. They create new companies, and I think in general it's just positive, and it also forces your competitors to be more on their toes.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, in many countries you look at the sort of the traditional industries. I mean, slow but very profitable. So you have someone who comes in and disrupt, and it forces everybody else to say that, okay, I mean, look at the taxi companies in Southeast Asia. Everyone wanted to, like, improve the customer experience. After all this ride hailing came in, they want to build their own tech. They make payment easier. It's like,
well, look at Bluebird today.
Yeah.
Pretty good company now, right? I mean, I haven't looked at like their stock or anything like that, but just by
integrated the tech.
Yeah, the tech and the experience is pretty good now.
It's still not as good as Grab, but it's much better.
But they didn't get $13 billion of investment to get to where they're at, right? So the ROI might be better.
What do you guys think of the quality of the various networks that follow? Because Rocket would be like the OG one, first one. Because they spent first to spend hundreds of millions in the region. Before that, you probably couldn't get a chip for a few million.
Yeah.
So that created one network. but then you have like the offshoots from each venture too. You have like Zalora alumni, you have Lazada alumni, you have Foodpanda alumni. Then you get the Grab alumni. Then you get
you
the
got Gojek, even
yeah,
Uber.
yeah, yeah.
There's a lot of talent in the region still because of Uber.
I was recently invited to an exclusive shop alumni one. Yeah. It's on my LinkedIn. I got the invite from Nick Nash. So he's like has another group doing this. And it's very interesting though, because like I'm curious to think what you think about the various groups. Because there was this one introduction phase, like I think 70% of the alumni in that group for Shopee, they were all doing agency work now, which means like they weren't like really building new ventures. So I kind of think, do you like in your circles, do you see?
But agency work is necessary, right? Because it helps all this like ecosystem. I mean,
It's a necessary because it's very fragmented and,
it is very fragmented.
and it's very hard to execute good stuff. But it also shows that there's a lack of what hard problems to solve or mindset around that or like 'cause I'm curious to see like for your what you see in your online network, like is anyone building meaningful things?
I mean, for me, one part of the pain I had when I was at Rocket is that I could see what's going on in China. I think a few months into his taxi, I went with Paul Manishki to Shanghai to visit Kuaidi. And then I visited Didi in Beijing.
Okay.
And the two companies eventually merged. Over Uber's purchases in China. And I look at the scale that they are doing things. I look at the tech that they were building and the things they were figuring out, the talent they were acquiring. And I just always felt that why the hell am I in Southeast Asia? If you don't see what's going on there, it's fine. And especially now looking back 2013 to 2016, best years in tech in China.
Why do you think it was able to go faster there?
Yeah.
Like just like what is the cultural bits of that like
I think couple of factors. This couple of years, the loss of Chinese business to try to expand into Southeast Asia. So I'm doing a lot of reflection comparing the two ecosystems. One thing about China is obviously single market.
Yeah.
And I would argue that China, US, two large single markets, and there's nobody else in the world which will fit into this bill. Like very, very large single market.
Yep.
And the same language, good infrastructure. I mean, of the different kinds of infrastructure. US had good infrastructure which was built like years ago. And China had the new infrastructure, high-speed railway, the logistic network,
and you had a few powerhouses where they had alumni, right? Like the Alibabas have been around a while, right?
They have been around for a while. I think just having an alumni is not enough, right? So you have all this growth. I mean, back then it was also
it's the alumni, but I mean like the belief that something can be built.
That's true.
Southeast Asia, where's the belief come from?
The belief that something can be built, the belief from investors who are willing to. I mean, just look at how many rounds of money that Meta had raised before they went for IPO.
Sure.
Yeah.
I don't have the numbers in my head of the whole ecosystem, but I think the US investors probably spend much more money in China compared to what they have ever been doing in Southeast Asia.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. I mean, SoftBank exists still today because Alibaba, right? Like that is.
But yeah, 2014 was the time when Alibaba went for IPO. Like I think that was the biggest IPO
in the world, the biggest listing. Yeah.
Then that got more money to be reinvested. I think for Southeast Asia, there has not been a fantastic exit.
We're still there today. Right?
Where lots of people get rich, they were thinking that, okay, where should I deploy my money? And of course, a large portion of that gets into VCs and gets into founders.
Yeah. So we're still there.
Right. I think the early stage guys have made significant money. Like later stage, probably not so much for Southeast Asia, right? So
I think still the amount compared to what the
of course, well, because it's a fragmented market. It's not one.
It is.
And I think like VCs finally like well, they're probably looking at Grab.
Yeah.
Right. And they're like, that's the biggest success in Southeast Asia, unless you guys can think of like a better one, like just
Gojek
or Shopee, maybe Gojek, maybe not more. I thought at one time.
Early stage.
Yeah, but I mean,
late stage, not.
Like, okay, Shopee, maybe, but look at the money that's gone into Grab versus their market cap. It's about dollar for dollar right now.
Yeah, great.
Give or take, right? Yeah. And so it's like it's not that people didn't make through that, but it's not so outsized and it didn't keep continuing to run. And maybe it will, maybe it won't, but like it shows the challenge of the fragmentation here.
That's a good point.
And like I think I didn't recognize that definitely Easy Taxi, but I saw it more and more at Lalamove is that like the economies of scale for Southeast Asia for tech are just not there. I mean, there's some, but particularly if you have any kind of operational bit, like again, the simple languages, having to hire local teams, having different, like you can't consolidate and like the efficiency and the margin that can come out of a business because
think about from leader's point of view, right? I mean, the same thing. I mean, Lalamove, Grab, or whatever. The same thing you have to think about 6 times because can you send a manager for Indonesia to work on the ground in Vietnam? So it's very hard.
Yeah.
You multiply that across all the operational aspects, and then that gets translated into the mental space as a leader you have to figure out. It's challenging.
I think the important insight is that you can build a category this way, but you have to be very realistic on the market sizing.
Well, and the amount you're willing to spend too, right? To
Yes,
get there, right?
correct.
Based on the
Correct.
market size.
Correct.
Like, well, let me give you an example. Like at Lalamove, this is a perfect example. It's China. We had 300 cities, roughly, give or take, represented 65% of our deliveries and almost 90% of our revenue for GMV, right? Like that shows you the level of effort for the business that I was running in Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like on a city per city basis, my cities were doing way more deliveries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But the significance on a revenue or top line,
Yeah.
and then so it just shows you the economy scale right there. Like I had the perfect juxtaposition of looking at the two businesses
Yeah.
and being compared against China all the time and being like, I'm killing it as far as like driving volume, but the profit that you can get out of it
Well, this
and the cost structure that supports it is just completely different.
it ties back to your question of like why China was probably more productive, right? It's just at the end of the day, I think in terms of the big and the small, the big is the government macro. They can provide the infrastructure and drive the incentives and policy. And then it's what you said about like the Alibaba guys on the ground level, right? But when there's a big disconnect, you need both. You need like so you're constrained by the macro, and the macro is not going to be that big on a distributed wealth perspective, right? So you can't capture that.
So one discussion, I think I told some of my friends about it. So it's between a large Chinese tech platform and a large logistics player in Indonesia. And over dinner table, I was there. And the guy from China was saying that, I mean, because they've examined the logistic efficiency in Indonesia, saying that how can we double that? The Indonesian guy who studied in China, who speaks perfect Mandarin, was saying that, well, just go to our warehouse, just go to our trucks. I mean, when do you see our trucks going above 30 kilometers an hour in Jakarta? It's something we can't fix. Go to our warehouses, and most of our warehouses, we get out of warehouse is immediately traffic jam. I mean, I've been to China and look at every logistic part you have. I mean, the government connects the expressway to it.
Yeah, correct.
The level, I think if you listen to Oyin, I think David Friedberg the other day talked about the electricity. So
Yes.
So last week I was in the city of Yiwu where like 33 million e-commerce parcels are sent out each day. And when I talked to factories there, they said, I mean, that they examined setting up factories elsewhere, including Vietnam. He said, nowhere they can get the rates of electricity as competitive as they can in China.
Yeah.
And that's a big factor.
And you're bringing 100 nuclear plants online, right?
Yeah.
So they're trying to drive that basically down to zero on a unit basis for these companies.
And sometimes you get into manufacturing, get into operations, and look at cost structure, you get surprises of why things are structured in a certain way.
And I think like the incentive for a place in like maybe Indonesia, Vietnam, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, is like labor generally is still so cheap. The impetus to drive productivity and efficiency,
It's just more people.
it's just like, oh, it's just easier to get more people because it's cheap, right? But that doesn't drive productivity or efficiency of an organization. It may solve the problem and it may allow you to grow at the speed you're growing, but it's like a different way to think about things because it's like, it's just easier to get more people.
Yeah, and that actually goes back to the same issue that we're figuring out. I mean, I was telling you earlier about being a founder, right? Sometimes, I mean, you are just so good at doing things yourself, but you need to empower the team to be better at what they're doing so that you become less reliant on you. And it's the same thing here, right? You hire more people short term, you put patches to the problem, you make it faster. But in the long term, it's not healthy because you end up having like bloated organizations.
Absolutely.
But how to balance the short term and long term is
my point is also that each incremental worker, you don't notice it.
Yeah, correct.
Right? So, right. So I think that's part of it. It's like, oh man, we all of a sudden have an extra 10,000 workers, but like I didn't notice any change in my expenses for the first 5,000. Yeah.
Feature of where we are in Southeast Asia.
Yeah. So like, and so some of this is just timing. Sometimes there's like macro things, like, and I think it's something that not the founders should think about. Actually, it's probably more for like investors to think about is like when there's tipping points in these kind of dynamics that force a step change in the underlying cost structures.
Yeah.
Right. Out of necessity. A founder, you can't wait for timing. These are things you can't control. But from an investor, you probably pay attention to like from a return standpoint and like where it's going.
One thing you can probably tell from first-hand perspective, I think Lalamove did well is that, I mean, you mentioned about 300 cities in China driving 90% of the GMV. So now we're looking at lots of Chinese tech companies trying to expand outside China. So a typical challenge they have is that whatever unit they have outside China is peanuts compared to them. And if it's evaluated by the same metric, by the same sort of resource allocation mechanism, they will not get
They will never do it. Never.
So you guys figured it out well. I mean, even though the global business outside mainland China is small, you still get resources, right? You still get to do things.
Yes. Yes. But like the input like we constrained our resources a lot compared to a lot of like very well-funded companies because we saw that unit input was so much more needed in the global business than the Chinese business. So it's like it's a simple ROI, right? It's like you put five in China to one, and then the productivity of that dollar goes so much further. And so in a good way, it built like the frugality and the efficiency from like day one, which allowed us to like, you know, go through some of the ups and downs that are just the macro cycles that weren't in favor, right? Whether it was funding, whether it was economies, whether that, so, and it built a resilience in the team. But yes, like you'll never see the return profile. I'd be interested to hear, like you work with a lot of Chinese companies, their perspective on like the necessity to expand, particularly operationally heavy. Like maybe if it's more tech or different, like if like it's all direct export stuff, like of a product, it's a different game. But like more from the space that we're in, like how did like look at JD for an example. They went to Indonesia, they dumped hundreds of millions of dollars because I talked to them several years ago providing delivery, and they're like, we're nowhere with this. And then I think they retreated, right? Like
they retreated from both Indonesia and Thailand.
Right. And so it's like biggest market in Southeast Asia, but like there's no like I think they just sense it's like it doesn't make sense to keep spending that money. It's better to defend. It's actually more efficient to defend our own space.
So what's the lesson then? Right? So like if you're a Chinese trying to expand, like what
I wrote a whole book about it, but
Yes. That's why I'm seeing it up, right?
Here's the book.
I've seen that the buy now and I don't see it flashing. Speaking of live commerce.
YouTube should really, really close the loop of buying as that it becomes much easier for many podcasts. But anyway, so I look at that. I mean, I think the bigger challenge for many of these companies is that many of the founders they know China intricately well.
Yeah.
They don't know any of the outside markets because the market in China requires so much effort to defend. There's so much competition. It's very difficult for them to spend their mental space on different markets, especially when you have multiple markets. Each market would give you feedback which is different from what you see in China. You need to make a decision. And if you are not familiar with the market yourself, you gravitate towards someone you trust in the market. But if the someone you trust in the market keeps telling you things which are different from your own cognition, your own life experience, at some point of time, you are either going to say that, oh, this market is just different, or you are going to say that, okay, this guy's incompetent. And the latter seems to be the more common sort of way that things will
I felt that way at times, for sure.
Just look at
No, but it's true.
Yeah.
It's true, right? Like, and of course the market's different.
Yeah.
Right? That's the thing. Like I was telling my team, like, of course every market is different.
Yeah.
So let's figure out what isn't different.
Yeah.
And is there a business in what isn't different?
But then the issue, I mean, think about back to Rocket days, like every month you capital call, you decide, I mean, how much money is allocated to which market. How do you fucking do that? How do you do that if you don't know the market? I mean, everyone in each market will tell you that, okay, because of this peculiarity, we need more resources in this way.
Yeah.
And somebody else in another market will tell you something different. And also another dimension is that, okay, a bigger market will tell you that, okay, because we're big, we need this.
Yeah.
And a smaller market will tell you that, okay, because we can potentially have more growth, that therefore we need this. And all these things come in.
That's why the operating model of Rocket makes sense on a month-to-month basis, because you can really tune every month. And then it's like a very data-driven German approach where they would look very heavily at the KPI stack.
Yeah.
And so that's why every month it kind of makes sense on a frontier when you don't know.
One of the things I talk to most founders at this point, like it's about expansion and like what are the criteria? Why do you expand? When do you do? And I think you will see less and less models go the rocket where you go to so many markets so early and then be like, well, because like it's so risky to go that way that like you're interpreting data as being because I've seen markets like go really slow and then be the best market for Lalamove over time, right? And like you're like if you looked at the first 18 months, you're like this market's terrible, but we had confidence in the product market fit from like your home market typically, and we had a foundation there that we didn't have to over resource things. But if you just go so wide so quickly, I think you're really playing with fire as far as resources. Like you're making a big gamble that you'll get some insight from some market that actually helps you with that capital allocation.
It's quite hard.
And it's really hard.
And nowadays, I mean, you look at this food delivery player, Meituan, right? So China,
it tries Saudi, right?
It tries to expand. I think now they're the top player in Hong Kong, and of course, people sort of argue that Hong Kong is not really outside China, and now they're going to Saudi, and they had the opportunity to buy Foodpanda in Southeast Asia, which they didn't. Which I think initially I was thinking that okay, I mean, buying Foodpanda will force you to really like take over something, they run it, and you have the capabilities, you have the resources to make it more efficient. But then I thought about it again. They're probably doing the right thing by going to Saudi Arabia because look at Alibaba buying Lazada back in 2016. We can't say it's a right or wrong decision, but they definitely had to spend much more resources trying to figure out the peculiarities of each market in Southeast Asia. Well, as for Meituan, what they do is operational heavy. Supply, demand, and I mean, two types of supply, right? The food as well as the riders.
Yeah.
And,
Reset
and,
it's not easy.
and they can easily get stuck in the market.
Yeah.
They can easily get stuck. So from their point of view, they have to be very cautious. I mean, if they go into one market, they have to better have a good chance to win in that market,
Mhm.
have a chance to concentrate that their limited, I mean, sort of overseas expansion
Yeah.
resources, limited managers who can function in overseas markets while still understand the core of the organization into that market, win that market before they move on to another market.
I mean, I tend to agree the strategy makes it's a long-term strategy in a good way because it's like, look, our China business is enormous. We
Mm.
cannot jeopardize this.
Mm.
We see potential outside,
Mm.
but like we don't need the outside
Yeah, you don't.
to survive or to succeed, right?
Yeah.
And so with that, they can be a bit more patient in what learning looks like, and definitely constrain the. It's way cheaper
Mm.
to like build your own market and in the way you want than to go buy, spend a lot of money,
Yeah.
try to integrate a different culture, as you said, with like Lazada or whatever. And I think they probably learned, like, for me, this is like actually a really good move. And they're like, hey, we're not trying to win global expansion in the next 2 years. Why do we need to?
Mm.
Well, it ties to also the macro.
Yeah.
Like the time that we are doing this, there was a lot of easy money. Squeezed over from, just whatever loose rates to right into VC.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the forcing function, like, well, there's so much money, you might as well deploy it. And then it probably kind of managed the whole culture of big money expansion, right? And like, so what do you tell founders these days that if they're looking at expansion, like what's the advice? Is it slow kind of
Well,
kind of like a Lalamove approach?
yeah. Well, so like Lalamove's unique too because it started in Hong Kong. So like it's like starting a company in Singapore. Like you were by necessity at some point
Yeah, of
if
course.
you are going for a VC model of any kind, right?
Correct.
So like that gives you a different framework than somebody who has like starts in Indonesia
Yeah.
with big domestic markets. I was just in Jakarta talking to all these founders, and they founders always more and more, and I was like, well, are you dominating your market?
Mm.
Do you feel that like if you expand, it's not going to either jeopardize your cash
Yeah.
or your talent?
Mm.
Because at what expense? Like wherever market you're going to is going to be smaller than Indonesia.
Yeah.
So like the hurdle to expand, if you're not just
Very high.
it's very, very high. And I would say that for most markets in Southeast Asia, with the exception of like Singapore. Like even if you're in Malaysia, it's like, but like the GDP per capita is there, and it's like you could build a business that like if you wanted to then go expand,
Yeah.
like you should feel good that your domestic business isn't going to go under, and you're from there, so like it's probably in the middle case, but like
It's interesting because like if you talk to just real businessmen,
Yeah.
just China businessmen,
Yeah.
that's like the default mentality. Just like have a very strong business, then think about whatever afterwards.
Yeah.
But I guess in the tech space, because of where we've been in the past decade, it seems like a lot of the young founders I meet these days, they're always like trying to jump ahead to the next market.
Yes.
But they haven't even solved very strong product market fit or even
their tech's
stable
not great, or they
core.
don't-
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Right.
many issues. So
But in a good way, the
Yeah.
dry up of all the funding has
Correct.
forced these companies
Correct.
to really rationalize spend. And so they actually know if their business model is
Correct.
sustainable. Like, for example, you can look at all of like the bike sharing and stuff like
Yeah.
this. Those were not great business models.
Yeah.
But the capital forced them
Yeah.
to go so fast that like when the funding dried up, there was no business left. Right. So anyway, it makes you really understand your business model.
There's a reflection about the business model of like shared power banks it's a very interesting business model because initially people were saying that, okay, we need to invest in this business model and lots of companies receive lots of money. And because people believe that it's become a consumer entry point for a lot of other things, it didn't. But a few years later, when the capital started to get squeezed, they started forcing all these companies to make money, and these companies realized they can actually make money.
They can
because they build a consumer habit to
Mhm.
always like and always charge and this time I was in China. I was like comparing the. I mean, I got used to that as well, right?
Yeah.
You don't bring a power bank with you. You just go somewhere, sit down,
It's so convenient that
and you
change behavior.
yeah, you take it for default. There's always a stack of rental power banks there. I realized the price that I'm paying for this has been rising from in the past was nothing
Yeah.
to 1 yuan per half an hour. Now it's like some of the places you pay 4 or 5 yuan per half an hour.
Well, it's solving
And,
a convenience utility makes sense, right? So,
and yeah, and for many people, it's just yeah, sure, I will spend on it. But what I've been reflecting is that if it's not for the early like crazy amount of burning,
Sure, you'd be waiting years to actually get that.
how will the consumer get into this habit? Like
No.
this dependency.
For sure. In consumer businesses, money makes a big difference, right? That's why VCs are willing to bet a lot. But you have to really believe in the change in the behavior is going to come.
And also, yeah, also within the time span that the amount of money you do,
Yeah.
you throw in the market, that actually does change the consumer behavior. Because before that, you don't know.
You're right.
It's based on projections.
Yeah, you're right. But what I would like, yeah, that's a very good point, right? Like the money accelerates change in behavior as much as the product market
Right.
fit. Probably. And for most, actually, there's certain ones like ride hailing that probably like it's so much better than the incumbent, like what you were doing.
Yeah.
The behavior's going to change. But for most things, people are resistant to change.
Yeah.
Right? Like in everything in their life, it's just like a natural default, especially as we get older. So like the money really helps
Yeah.
do that. But it also burns companies that might have been good companies
Yeah.
out, right? Like
Yeah,
there's a
yeah.
lot of things that go
Double-edged
out.
sword.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. So
Well, I think a good framework is that, like, maybe if you're a young founder starting up, there's nothing wrong with focusing on fundamentals. Like we said,
yeah,
focus on your core market, make sure you understand the product market fit, go through the cycles. But I mean, like, if you have a very clear vision or you have a very, very good clarity around like what that could be at scale, right? So then maybe you could kind of play this big VC game and try to convince.
Sure.
Of course, that depends on the macro. Is there enough money to go around? Are people distributing? This kind of stuff, right? I mean, it's very interesting because Sam Altman recently tweeted. Tell me what you guys think about this.
Okay.
If you strap a rocket to a dumpster, the dumpster can still get to orbit, and the trash fire will go out as soon as it leaves the atmosphere. Many important insights contained in that observation, but it's also better to launch nice satellites instead. It's very telling, right? Because we've built companies like this in the region. Like Grab was kind of pieced back together in reverse, right?
Yeah.
And then, as you were saying, even now to this day, it's not even that great in your perspective, right? So,
right. Like it's good, but like
Service is great. Yeah.
it's not like it's
utilities there.
It's ubiquitous, right?
Yeah, correct. Utility is there. You need it no matter what.
I don't know. We all have perspectives on this type of stuff, but it's like each situation to me is so nuanced that I try not to get caught up in like quotes like this because it's like maybe for someone that is absolutely their reality, and for most people maybe it's not. And so like
I think
when
for most people it's not. That's
right, for most people it's not. But when you haven't like particularly first time founders and stuff and younger, like you don't have no filter, and you have no context and filter, so it's really hard. Yeah, you have to be really thoughtful of like what you're trying to emulate and learn from versus like what your vision and your reality of what you're building is.
Which is why the founders like an Adam Newman has reality distortion abilities.
Yes,
people will see that and be like, oh, that's the model, right? But
he's just like
not necessarily, right?
Right? Like they both have they have that superpower.
Yeah, they do.
And it's incredible.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. It's a very different game than maybe your own context.
Yes,
right? And you got to really compare it carefully.
You really have to think about that.
Let me take the conversation back a little bit towards the people aspect. I mean, you are VQ, right? I mean, sort of second generation Vietnamese.
American-born Vietnamese.
Second generation Vietnamese migrants in America or America. Oh, whatever.
It depends what you want to call it. I was taught that I'm a first gen because my parents were immigrants. Okay. Some people call me second gen.
Anyways, basically, you were parachuted into Vietnam, and you are American, studied in Spain, and parachuted into Hong Kong, and then eventually you went back to the US to try to replicate some of the business that you built in Asia. So I'm originally from China, in Singapore, and had a bit of experience everywhere.
You've been here, what, 25 years? 20 years?
I came here 24 years ago, and I moved away 5 times, collectively spent like 4 years outside Singapore, but eventually I'm back to Singapore. But I just want to take your perspective on how do you think about, I mean, all these differences in managing people, dealing with people. In early days, 2012 in Vietnam, Rocket had to hire someone who speaks English, right?
Well, I mean, I think the one interesting feature that many maybe Western audience will not know is that you can get away with speaking English in any country in Southeast Asia. You can live in a bubble if you really needed to. Right? There's always this base who's been educated abroad, has similar value set, has consumed the same media, right? So, but like early days, it's very hard to compare because there was nothing. Everything was literally we had to build from scratch. Like the first like e-commerce delivery company, CS for commerce, regional retouching. Like these things just don't conceptually just don't exist.
Did you feel a bit of culture shock dealing with the Vietnamese, even though you speak Vietnamese?
I don't think so because there was enough poor people who you could hire like yourself.
Okay.
where then I mean, it always starts at the co-founder level, and that really, to me, that really shaped the split between Zalora and Lazada in terms of culture, like crazy angry European culture versus like more like people like I don't know, like a Vitkio who can connect with the locals better, and maybe we needed one or the other because clearly one did better than the others. So I don't know, like
But also because of the macro, the circumstance.
yeah, of course. So like, Foodpan was very German centric for even like today, it's like very led by Berlin, right?
Yeah.
So
The Koreans lost the battle in the politics, which we can talk about. So.
okay, that's interesting. Yeah. But like at least from my perspective, it was always very smooth. Like I never felt a jarring disconnect culturally. I felt there was enough in between worldness where you get the best of both, where I could manage blue collar workers because I could speak Vietnamese, but I also can deal with the higher ups, and then building a talent layer. Right?
Did you feel challenging to deal with the government?
I mean, I've had limited experience with that. I mean, like you get your raids, but then the key thing for Rocket early days, you need to pick a very strong local partner.
Okay.
Like in Vietnam, I remember sitting in the office with Ali and all the other guys who were about to hire. Like, okay, we interviewed 2, 3 guys. I was like, "Who do you like?" We all had to pick and vote, and then clearly he already knew his answer. I just want to see like what you think.
Yeah.
So, but then I think we all picked the right local like partner for Vietnam. It made like closing easy. It made opening new ventures easy, and I have heard so many disaster stories from like Indonesia, Philippines, whatever. Just like people disappearing with huge chunks of money and directors disappearing, right? Structurally, it was not a problem with regulators if you have a very good, especially in early days, the right person to handle it. These days, it's handled differently. With too much money, you must hire a governance team, right? You need very specialized people who are very well connected, and that requires a lot of money and specialty. Or you have to pick like very good partners who are already entrenched, and then you kind of work through that kind of model. And so it never, yeah, I don't know. I didn't have a problem. Did you have a problem? Like,
Well, culture shock for sure, right?
different from Chicago, from
Yeah, like I mean, I, I'd been all over the world and traveled a bit, but like I'm still an American who doesn't speak Canto, and I'm still an American who doesn't speak Canto. Um, but like, yeah, for sure, like Hong Kong is a very unique market in and of itself. However, like you English, like for the most part, like you get around, like I used to be in British colony, so
yeah,
like there's definitely some advantages, like in the sense like I can navigate that way. Managing the team wasn't as hard for me because I'd already managed and worked with people from all over the world. So
yeah,
I mean, I had to learn a lot of new stuff, but it wasn't uncomfortable to have to learn
yeah.
new things. And like in some ways, it like being novel to the team and then in the market like was to my advantage. So I like we go out to like onboard drivers like at the gas stations because Hong Kong like right before they have 2 shifts for their
Yeah.
taxis.
Yeah.
They would line up at the petrol stations right before they would hand over to the next guy, and there'd be lines of like hundreds of taxis
Wow.
at the petrol stations.
And they're
so
all
we would,
grumpy.
and then, oh, they're not happy, not happy. And it's it's the middle of it's summer in Hong Kong. It's so humid. It's like
Yeah.
38 to 40 degrees. And I'd watch my team. We'd set up our banners and try to onboard the drivers, and like the drivers, they're so grumpy, wouldn't roll down the window. But then when they saw the white guy knocking, they're like, "What the hell is this guy?"
They're curious.
And so like they're more curious because they're like, "What is this guy doing here?" And they'd roll it down a little, so at least I could get like the flyer in the window.
Yeah.
Where I've just like watched my local team really struggle with it. So like, it's a little bit of advantage to being novel.
Just a side note, lives of drivers in China now are better because they are driving electric vehicles. And a key advantage of electric vehicles is that you can stay idle while still keeping the air conditioning.
And in Hong Kong, they use liquefied petroleum.
Yeah.
And so it's not even like diesel or gasoline or petrol. So it's like anyway, yeah. And they had those like forever the old like Toyota Crowns that are around for like 1990. So it's very very unique dynamic there.
Then from Hong Kong to the rest of Asia, then back to the US.
Yes, I think early on at Lalamove, I would like really didn't know how to navigate all the different cultures. Not in the sense I was uncomfortable, but it's like how do you manage, right?
Yeah.
Because I say like, of course they're all different.
Yeah.
Of course they're all different. And I was like, all right. At first, you probably try to cater a little bit to, like that. Our Philippine was like super super fun. Singapore team was a little bit more quiet and like or like like all the typical stereotypes come up for a reason about Southeast Asia, right? And so like you try to like manage your team under like with those differences, but then like that actually as you do more and more countries, it gets exhausting.
Yeah.
Because it's like you can't make a derivation of everything you do and how you communicate and be efficient, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so what we still did fairly early on, and I think it worked really well, and actually I stress this to founders that want to expand, is like, all right, let's stop focusing on what's different because we all know it's different. Like, of course we're different. Of course our Brazilians were different than our Chinese, which are different than our Mexicans and Indonesians. But like, okay, okay, got it. Don't need to talk about it anymore, but what's the same? And so we really talked about like what we were trying to accomplish and our values.
Yeah.
Right. And we had the exact same 4 values from like day one of the company, which
Where'd that come from? That's because that's very key.
just the management team. Xing had it, and then we like talked through them, and we picked values that were consistent with the business that we were in. So
It's probably quite rare for that to happen.
I think it is quite rare, to be honest.
quite rare.
But our thought process was like, we always use the example of like, if it wasn't the value of airlines to be safety, you wouldn't fly on that. So what were the ones that were important for our business? And like execution is one of them, right? So that was one of our values. And I won't go through all of them, but we hired for that. So like our whole interview process, every question, they wouldn't say like, show me an example of this value, but like embedded in every single question was one of our 4 values. And so we would interview for this. And then when we'd hire people after 3 months, I mean, depending on a certain level, we would do like not a probation, but like just like a presentation, like what have you learned? And like we would in that presentation, they were expected to show how they've demonstrated these values. And then performance reviews always embedded the values within the performance
Very
reviews.
smart.
And so what this did is the values became that common language. And so when you go to communicate across markets that obviously are different, you now have a common set of understanding.
Correct.
And then those values became the language. And so like imagine like going back to the US, right?
You got to translate that.
Yes, I'm like everybody's like, and it's middle of COVID, right? And they're like Americans and like the Chinese is not a secret that like not best friends, right? Like at a like a media level, right? Like at the end of the day, we're all people, right? It's like I don't know, it's like join a Chinese company, blah blah blah, and it's like, well, I'm American, I've been there since the beginning. And I was like, of course it's different, right? But what I can tell you is that it's not as important as these things.
Yeah.
And this is why they're important. And so like it's still it helped.
Yeah.
And I think like we made it and we're very transparent about it before you hire anybody, but like it still didn't mean it was easy. Like, right, that's the thing. It's like we create this common language, but like as a leader, like it's still exhausting to kind of do that. You do a lot of mental translation, and then you use those as your tools to then, after you've done the translation in your head of the differences, to communicate. And so like it works sometimes, it doesn't work sometimes. I would say definitely the US was the hardest. But I think there's the macro again, COVID at that time. Like there's a lot of social things in the US
that changed probably.
That changed a lot. Like, and I hadn't lived there in 10 years too. So I'd obviously gravitated east in like how I do things. And like I kind of fell in the middle. And I I mean, I told you guys that story earlier. And like that was like mind blowing to me that like I was too easy on people in Asia and way too hard on them in the US. And I was like, well, I'm doing it the same, guys. And so even knowing all of this and being self-aware is still like there's still gaps that as a leader you really have to navigate.
I mean, also pretty depends on the business model because like I've been helping Sabrina launch her snacks business into the US and it's at a very high distribution level and it's extremely efficient. It's like the language of the way you do business here on a partnership level, it's the amount of face and talking around and dining and whining and just all those things, right? But you just always get to the point. Goal, okay, what do we need to do? Goal, okay, next. Like just keep doing that, and then you could scale very easily. So
can I ask you a question on that? Because I remember going to the US and like trying to bring on like third-party vendors for different things that we needed in business. And like I would get on the call with like the head of sales of a company, let's say our insurance broker, right? And they'd try to spend the first like 10 minutes talking to me about American football. And I'm like,
interesting.
They're like, oh, I saw that you went to Iowa. And I was like, yeah, that's 20 years ago. Like, I've got 20 minutes. I want this. I want this. I want this. Like, that was more the Asian part of me of like, let's get to the point. Like, I don't need these pleasantries. I don't need like, you don't need to be my best friend. I need you to, here's what I'm willing to spend. Here's what I need. Can we do it?
So it might be industry specific.
Yes.
Or also the media. Because a lot of the business transactions that we're doing are happening at expos.
Yes.
So like everyone's there for a purpose. The lists are the expos in America are just they're crazy. They're too massive. So everyone cuts out their map and who they want to hit. And so I think maybe that's why also. But apparently like Screen was something on follow-ups.
Yes, it's way more direct.
It's way more direct. Maybe because at the level their transaction they already like the expo cleared a layer. And maybe so rapport is not as much needed. Maybe in a different industry or context, they like to do American small talk, which is very
It's
common.
so annoying, right? Like, I think once you get past that small talk, then it is
then-
much more direct.
yeah.
Somebody gave me some good advice once that like there's two types of cultures. Like again, there's obviously one's in the middle. There, have you heard of like the coconut and the peach theory?
No, what is this?
So there's two types of cultures. There's the coconut and there's the peach. The coconut is like really, as you know, very, very hard on the outside, but super, super soft on the inside, right? And so that would be more like maybe like Chinese, right? Like it takes a long, long time to get in, develop a relationship, but once you have the trust,
that's it.
it's like for life.
Like the Japanese would do, but
Or let's say more East, maybe not Chinese. But like in contrast, the peach would be like the Americans, which is like the small talk.
Yeah.
Maybe the Germans are good coconut. Maybe that's it, right? I don't know. Yeah, maybe the Germans is a better example than the Chinese, right? But like there's cultures that really like it takes a long time to get in, but once you're in, they really like you're like family, they'll treat you, they'll trust you no matter what, right? So or there's like the peach, which is like the Americans, we're like all fuzzy and soft on the outside. And like you go to a restaurant, they all want to pretend like they're your best friend. But like hit of a peach is very, very hard. So like that's all surface level. And so it's so hard to actually be in forever with an American because it's a bit softer and kind of transient. Does that make sense? Like
that makes sense.
at least but it's anyway. So I don't know where I was going with that. I just think it was like an interesting way for me to like use that filter. Like at least to start.
You're like, oh, you're a peach or a coconut.
Yes. Because then that's how I adjust my approach. Right? Actually.
Correct.
Yeah.
and obviously, like all frameworks, there's a starting point, right, for you to easily sort of find an anchor, and from this anchor, then you make adjustments. You don't stick to the framework, but framework gives you an easy way to say, let's start from somewhere.
And everything's a continuum, right? Like we always like to say it's black, it's white, but like the truth is like it's everything's a continuum, but at least you do have those anchor points to have a filter of how to think about things.
The part you mentioned about China's business is, I think over the last 20 years, things have evolved a lot. I mean, the traditional way of doing business is a lot of trust-based, like all East Asian cultures. But now with all this competition, all this excessive focus on
tell me about it,
excessive focus on efficiency, I think things have become a bit different.
What's the point?
I mean, some companies are very straightforward to the point. I was involved in a discussion, I will not name which company, but between the board of a European company as well as the co-founders of a very large Chinese tech company. So as we sat down, the conversation went this way. The co-founder of the Chinese company was saying that, oh, remember co-founder and board level? So I should have prepared a company introduction, but since you know what we do, we know what you do, let's get to the business.
Said it with a smile?
She said it with a smile. Smart.
I kind of like that.
Yeah.
And the discussion became very interesting because you really I think it was set in a context saying that, hey, let's not guess around what each other's intentions are. Let's try to focus on how we can work together.
And did you feel like there was honesty in that dialogue, even after prefacing it as we're going to be honest?
A lot.
Yeah. Okay.
From both sides, which I think setting the context is interesting because even you display honesty from this side, the other side might not perceive this way.
Yeah. So I mean, it's like the chess game, right? It's gamesmanship.
On this side, they laid out all their numbers, and I actually back checked the numbers like the same evening with some people who might know the sources. These guys be very honest with you. They're not bluffing about their stuff.
I have a question for you, Blake. So when you were launching Lalamove in the US, did you compare or think about comparing like against the Uber experience? Because Uber was very, like you said, you had trouble maybe translating the culture. There was some resistance in the team with the hard working elements, but like Travis Kalanick was able to kind of overcome that inertia, do you think? Like, because there was a very hardcore culture, right? So
it's like overcome the inertia of what,
maybe you're right because it's the macro of COVID, but like building a culture of hard work and like just no nonsense and just execution oriented, right? Because clearly you can do it, but
I found that like, you know what was really, really hard about that is I tried to instill that, and actually when I interviewed everybody, I was explaining that like you're going to work harder. You're probably going to get paid less. You're going to get paid less. You can go find jobs where you're going to get paid more. It's a better way to frame that. But I promise you're going to learn, and I promise that like if you stick around long enough, you will be just amazed at what we're able to accomplish. Because I've just been through that.
Correct.
And like that was total honest belief. But at the same time, I felt like I didn't really like buy into it entirely. You know what I mean? I pushed hard. I think that's what it was. It's like, it's one thing, Americans are like known for selling. Right. So maybe like, even though I was being honest, they really felt I was selling. But then like when my follow through of like, I show up at the office at 7 and I leave at 10 because like, I know what it takes to build it from zero. We have no brand, we have no nothing, we have limited resources. Even though the company's raised a lot, we still like pretend like we have nothing. And we got nothing actually until we proved ourselves. And I think that was a lot for a lot of the employees to digest that, like, wow, it can really be that way. And then I would keep pushing
Yeah.
and pushing and
Yeah.
pushing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was like a really, really hard transition, especially with COVID and like
Yeah.
all of their peers were working from home. And like we were in tech, but it wasn't like sexy tech.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it's like
yeah.
hard go put a sticker on a
Yeah.
van. What was a sticker? I got a college degree. Like 10,000 stickers.
That's
Not
what
like
college prepares you for.
right. And so it's like I think maybe in retrospect, like I didn't do enough job adjusting to the culture of like really explaining the why, because I thought maybe like me explaining it once or twice
Yeah.
was enough
Yeah.
to build the belief, and I didn't do enough actually selling.
Or you tell me, because it's your experience.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because of the macro. There was a political element, and there was also a COVID macro element. But like, if you were able to continue, say these were not,
Yeah.
like a black swan to you.
Yeah.
If you had gone through a few more iterations, maybe you could have got to like that Uber kind of level. Maybe it's just you needed to cycle through it.
Yeah, and honestly, I think part of the problem was that and this is my job, right? Like it's not that I failed, but like I took every learning that we had done successfully across all these other markets
Yeah.
and like playbook. And one of our values was don't recreate the wheel, right? Like just because you're smart, don't do something different. Like prove the thing that we've done doesn't work before you do something new. I stuck to the playbook, stuck to it, stuck to it. And like what do like young, hungry people love? Growth.
Yeah.
And when it doesn't, like, and because we're B2B more than like B2C, so you can't just put money on a problem and like have it resolved. And so like when it doesn't light like fast, they're like, wait a minute, he said all these things and it's not coming true. And then you get those things in your head of like, well, my friends are kind of at home and DoorDash is doing really well. And like, it's COVID and like, I mean, I don't want to overly speculate, but fair enough that they like start to doubt. Right? Then you have like, well, he said these things, it's not happening. And so like it made it really, really a challenging environment, both from my side, but I mean, retrospectively, I probably could have been a bit more patient with their questioning. But I knew that if we kept hacking at it and at the end,
you would show them.
we would show them because I knew there was amount of effort and not quitting that would get us there.
Yeah.
Even if we didn't get it right at the beginning.
Yeah. Right.
But like again, the peer models were Uber, DoorDash, Grub, like these things, these consumer businesses just. So anyway,
was it a cultural nuance there that you could have adjusted slightly on the cultural side? That would have smoothed this like the short term.
I think probably cultural a bit, but probably just better situational awareness of the macro things. I could have done a lot better. I just didn't believe in failure, but I also not living in the US for a long time. I didn't want context to be an excuse for anybody, but I could have still acknowledged the context. If that makes sense.
That's fair.
Right? It shouldn't be an excuse, but I could have done a better job acknowledging it might have circumstantially the challenges that were against us. And then that would have probably brought us closer together instead of me pushing hard and then
easier to swallow.
Yes. Yeah. So anyway, like that's the reflection I have. So
it's not hard science there, right? It's just each of us like figuring out what's the right way to do. I mean, making the mistakes, even though you are very experienced in doing something.
Yeah.
And learning from these mistakes, reflecting from this, and keep yourself open and just carry on with life.
Yeah. I mean, I beat myself up about it for a long time, but like it took good. Yeah, because I'm not there to make like people not like their job.
Yeah.
Like I'm there to do something amazing with these people. So that when you start to see this divide, and then like obviously there's macro things with Didi getting delisted at that time, and then like that's what caused the US business basically shut down. Like not directly, indirectly. The hardest thing for me in my career is like when I laid off the whole US team.
Yeah, it's tough.
In one day, because I said like I know like this situation is really messy right now with COVID when I hired them.
Yeah.
I know that like there's this Asian company you've never heard of.
Yeah.
You say is big over there. Can you trust it? I don't, they don't want to trust it. They don't have any data points to trust it. But when I'd sit there and say, all of that, you can trust me. And so go back to the same people to put the trust in me. And then to fire them and let them all go. That was easily like the worst day of my professional career.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah,
it's a tough one. So I guess in your mind it was like a failure in some way.
It definitely wasn't the story I wrote when I moved to the US, right? Right, but like there's so much lesson in that. I'm not resentful, bitter, anything. I said like I was lost for a bit.
Yeah.
But I think retrospectively, that's where you find growth.
Yeah. Correct.
Just realizing some of the right hard things. And so, yeah,
That's also something that dealing with lots of entrepreneurs from China who were perceived as being very successful. They were very successful, but I mean, circumstances have changed quite a lot these few days. And obviously, I mean, whatever they do, the competition in China is fierce, and the growth is not there compared to what they would experience 10 years ago, or even just 5 years ago before COVID. And they have to, I mean, many of them have to expand their business outside to find growth. But that's like another sort of separate entrepreneur journey, and it's different from the first one because you're dealing with the market you're not familiar with, and you have this playbook which you have spent so many years perfecting,
Yeah.
and now you are in a position where you inevitably constantly thought about your playbook,
Yeah.
constantly thought about, I mean, what I've done, was that pure luck?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah,
But I think if you have like belief, like there's always that like imposter syndrome, right?
yeah,
Even after success, you have imposter syndrome, right? Like I've kind of been out of the game
Yeah.
a bit, and I look at all these entrepreneurs, I'm like, how could I do that again?
Yeah.
But then like we look back at our track record, like not just me, but like us, and it's like we've been okay till now. Like why should I be doubting the future? Doesn't
That's
mean it's
true.
going to be smooth. Like we always forget, like
That's true.
think of like all of the times that you've actually failed to an unrecoverable moment in your life.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Anybody
Well,
is a human, right? Not
yeah,
just tech entrepreneurs,
yeah,
but just like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and there's almost none of these.
Yeah.
So like, why do we have such self-doubt, right? And so like, that is something that gives me like continual courage to like want to grow in different ways
Yeah.
and to not have that imposter syndrome. And then like, sorry, I'm pontificating here a bit, but like also to realize that this is just one big fucking game.
Yeah.
And so, and like in a good way, not in like a cynical way, but like once
Or
you
you can
realize,
shape it.
and yeah, and it's like, all right, what game do you want to play?
Correct.
So your whole life, you're probably groomed in some way or influenced because you don't have enough reference points, enough experience. But like once that's the one thing about getting older a little bit is like, wait a minute,
Yes.
this is a game. I'll pick the game I want to play and then shape that game.
Yeah.
And I don't think I realized like out of MBA, all this, like I did all the things supposed to go to Rocket, be an entrepreneur, but like it's only through the reflection. It's like, I get to choose the game I want to play.
Correct.
And I think people forget this.
and enjoy that process
Yes.
along the way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. I think we'll be talking for a long time. I think Joshua's getting nervous about the
Okay.
camera battery and all the.
Sure.
And I think his hard disk as well.
Circle.
We have come full circle, and it's been a very good discussion. It's been 10 years.
It's good to reconnect.
Yeah.
Always good to see.
Yeah. So Blake is usually based in St. Petersburg.
St. Petersburg, Florida.
Florida.
Not Russia, but clients are in Russia.
Cool. Well, we'll talk about that next time.
Yeah.
Alex is usually based in Malaysia, so now we're in Singapore. So
Yes.
yeah, and we should get some food.
Bye.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Joshua, for behind the scene.
Appreciate it.